It's Joseph this morning. So thank you, Ensemble. Welcome this morning. We continue our series on the global church. And this morning I want to talk about migration. It's the story of all of us. Isn't it true? Taiwan, Germany, Scotland, Canada, Lebanon, Vietnam, husband from Colombia, Canada. Anybody here? England, Korea, Golden State Warriors, Iran, Amir, Northern Ireland, Georgia. No, it's migration. Come on, don't laugh at them. Anyone else? Puerto Rico? South Africa? Brazil? And from Syria. We all have a story of migration, of movement. And so, I'm not going to say squat about the election. It's just interesting for me. That once again, immigration is such a hot button topic. Just like it was 4 years ago, and 8 years ago, and 12 years ago. As if people do not move across borders, and as people do not seek a new beginning and a future for themselves and their children. When I was growing up, there was the occasional opportunity to read a National Geographic. Now you have to understand, the National Geographic had to come from the US to South Africa. So when I was a student, there was an opportunity to buy it. There was no shipping. They were shipping it for free from the US, and I signed up for it. And I loved it. I kept every single copy. Isn't National Geographic the greatest magazine? With all the photos of the natural world, the splendor, the beauty. That's where I saw Yosemite, and like, one day I want to go to Yosemite. One day I want to see a redwood and see a sequoia. One day I want to see Crater Lake, and I've seen all of them. And then it seems like National Geographic made a change. They moved away from just the natural splendor of the world to human stories, to civilizations, to how did people get to be Aztec or Inca? How did people migrate from Africa, the Homo sapiens, and how did they wipe out the Neanderthals? It became the story of us, of how we've migrated across the globe. And today I found like half of the stories about nature and half the stories about us, humanity. And that's the story of the Bible. The entire Scripture is one big story of movement, of migration, of displacement. The first great story is Adam and Eve. Starts in what is today Iraq, and they get kicked out of the garden. And they move. And the story continues with Cain, and God says, you have to move. And he goes to cities that aren't even named. And he becomes a migrant. He becomes a sojourner, a traveler. And that story continues with the three patriarchs and matriarchs of our faith. Abraham's dad moved from Ur, and he moves to what today is Iraq. And he stops, and God says, no, Abraham and Sarah, I need you to continue the journey. And they move from what is Iraq into Canaan, which is today Israel. And there's a drought. Not once, but twice. And twice they don't have enough food to feed the animals, and they have to go to Egypt. But something happens. Twice Sarah is taken by the Pharaoh as a wife, as a concubine. And that shows us that when people are displaced across borders, the most vulnerable people are women. Women and children. Nothing has changed. And the same thing happens to Abraham and Sarah's son, Isaac. There's a drought. He cannot feed his flock. He and his wife Rebecca have to move. Rebekah is taken as a concubine, a wife by one of the kings. Same thing happens. The same thing happens to the third generation, to Jacob. His son, Joseph, ends up in Egypt. There's a tremendous drought. So Jacob, with his 3 wives and his sons and his daughters, the entire family of 70, go down to Egypt. And there they become slaves for 430 years. In the beginning, they are welcomed and celebrated, and over time, their position in society changes. And even after they come into the promised land, which is today still contentious, because they take land that did not belong to them. And we still haven't solved this problem in 2016, and I don't think we will solve it soon. What happens? David's great-grandmother, anybody know her name? Ruth, and the great-grandmother's mother? Naomi. They go, they move to Moab, the husband dies, the sons die, there's nobody to provide for them. They move back to Israel. They come there as strangers, sojourners, and God provides for them. Boaz provides. And from that lineage, David is born. So this is an entire story of movement. And lest Israel forget who they are, there's actually a commandment in the book of Exodus that says, you shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien. So with what would we translate resident alien today? Immigrant? Refugees? Undocumented? Okay? For why? Why should you not oppress them? Why should you not treat them the way that you were treated? Why? For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. This is burned into their identity. For 430 years, you were treated as subhuman, as less than, not belonging, as strangers, as aliens with no rights. God freed you from that. Now you have your own country. And when people get displaced from Moab and from Syria and from other places, and they join your community, do not treat them the way that you were treated. It's just as easy as that. Even the confession of what it means to be Jewish, we find in the book of Deuteronomy, says the following. A wandering Aramaean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived as not as a citizen, not as somebody who was welcomed, not as somebody who belonged, but as somebody who is strange, somebody who is foreign, someone who's a sojourner, someone who doesn't belong in the community, who will always be an outsider, even after 430 years being in the country. Why? Few in number. There he became a great nation, mighty and populous. And we know what happened. The story of Moses, the killing of the boys. So is there a word in this that stands out for you? That you wonder what it means? My ancestor was a wandering. What the heck is an Aramaean? What's an Aramaean? Well, he was Aramaic. But what is an Aramaean? Say it.
A person from Syria.
A person from Syria. Yeah. Because Jacob went to Syria, what's today Syria. There he met his wife, his father-in-law Laban, married the daughters, married the 2 concubines. And so his wives were Syrian, his children were Syrian. That is the ancestry of God's people. A wandering Aramaean. I didn't know it. I had to go research it. This is why you pay me. I did not know that. A wandering Aramaean, a wandering Syrian was my ancestor. And then went down into Egypt. And then came back into the promised land. Lest you forget, Jacob did not belong. Neither did Jacob's ancestry belong into Egypt. This is their DNA. Whenever you meet the foreigner, the stranger, remember how you want to be treated. So, in the Jewish language, in Hebrew, there are some words to describe them, like they are strangers, they are foreigners, they are sojourners, strangers, or resident alien. Now, in the Greek, you see a familiar word there. A stranger is a xenon. Have you heard the word of fear of strangers? Xenophobia. Here's the opposite. So if xenophobia, xenophobos, if that's the fear of the stranger, the Greek word for hospitality is philoxenos, the love of strangers. I did not know that either. That means that hospitality, which is the greatest value in Middle Eastern culture, that when somebody comes to your place, you give them protection, just like Abraham invited the strangers in. This is Psalm 23. Psalm 23 says, I am in a dangerous place. You invite me in. My enemies are out there. You lay out a table. You provide food. My cup overflows. Here I will be safe. There's sanctuary. Psalm 23 is about hospitality that God offers. Philoxenos. And so we are reminded that in the way we deal with other people that are the strangers, we show God's hospitality towards them. But the story goes on. This was not the only time they had to leave. Because, as you heard last Sunday, in 822, the Assyrians came, took 10 of the 12 tribes away. And next, in 586, the Babylonians came and took 2 of the last tribes away into captivity in what's today Iraq. And so all of God's people taken away in captivity. And this is what you might not know. Archaeologists and sociologists have shown us that only 10% of the people ever came back to Israel. So what happened to the other 90%? They were assimilated. The other 90% of God's people were assimilated in what's today Iran and Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and other countries. So a few months ago, in Time magazine, they showed all the countries of the world and who had taken in how many Syrian refugees. And this is not a criticism, it's just a comment. So I saw the country of Israel, and guess how many? 0. If these are your family, if these are the people that 3,000 years ago were taken into captivity and have become assimilated, I was just shocked by the fact that Israel had not taken in a single Syrian refugee. It's just a comment this morning. But moving on. Even Jesus was a refugee. The book of Matthew tells us that when Herod was seeking to kill him and his parents, that he went to Egypt for 5 years. Away from family. We have no idea of what those 5 years were like. And only after Herod died did they go back to Nazareth, and does he reclaim his heritage of being with family. In fact, the research shows us that in the time of Jesus, because of an ongoing drought, there were more Jewish people living outside of Israel than inside. And that's called the diaspora, the dispersion. In fact, of the 10% that went back, more than half of those that had come back no longer lived in the promised land at the time of Jesus. What does it mean? God's people are dispersed everywhere. And that's the story of the New Testament of the Christians. The first 70 years after Jesus, their life was terrible. They were ostracized. They were demonized. There was the most horrible stories of what they did at communion, eating babies. There was the most horrible stories of when they passed the peace, that they were having incest with one another. All kinds of terrible, terrible things of what these Christians did. Even those that were Roman citizens, that right was taken away from them for following Christ and not worshiping the Caesar. And yet they held on. In the 2nd century, we find very early, the book of Peter says the following: once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and exiles. 100 or 90 years after Jesus, this is still the situation that is happening in the lives of Christians. In 64, Nero burned down Rome while he was drunk and blamed the Christians. And so all the Christians got kicked out of Rome. Christians were demonized. They were kept out of the workplace, out of the guilds, out of the workforce. Christians couldn't go shop. Christians were mocked. Christians were persecuted if they did not bow down and say, I worship Caesar. 100 years later, this is still the situation, and you ask yourself, why would you ever be a Christian if this is what's going to happen to you? And yet they did. And slowly but surely Christianity grew, and the people around him saw that there was something different about them. But the reminder to us in 2016 here in Brentwood is, we are still exiles, we are still aliens. This is not our ultimate place. We will never fit into this world, especially if we speak truth to power, if we hold on to the values that the gospel gives us of what we lead our lives by. We should never fit in. We should be uncomfortable being an American because there are things that we do that conflict with our faith. There are things said and done in the name of Christianity and in country and of God that we say, I don't think that God blesses that. You are residents and aliens. Our ancestors have come to this country for many reasons. From Poland, and Hungary, and Lithuania, and Russia, and Wales, and United Kingdom, and South America, and Latin America, and Asia, and so many places. Why? Because there was war, there was internal displacement, there was poverty and famine. They couldn't own land. They just came out of the feudal system. They had this great opportunity to come to this tremendous country and start anew, have their own land, have religious freedom that is guaranteed by the Constitution. They had the opportunity to come and farm and provide food for themselves and the community. They had the opportunity to take those skills of raising livestock and providing food. That opportunity to build the American dream. If anything, we are all immigrants. We are all migrants. We are all the family of migrants. How many of you are first, second, or third generation? How many of you are fourth and more? Should be the rest of you. Yeah, you forgot. I tell you, I am proud to be an American. I am proud for the religious freedom that this country has offered us. I am proud that this country has always been a country that has said, wherever you are persecuted, wherever you are vilified, wherever you are treated as an alien because of your faith, or where you immigrated from to that country, this country will welcome you as an alien, as a resident, but more. This country will welcome you as one of our own. Isn't that the American dream? Isn't that our story? Isn't that the way we've lived for the last 350 years? That we do not say to people, you are too dark-colored or too dark-skinned or too this or too that or too not Christian. That, for me, does not fit what it means to be an American citizen. that does not fit with the dream that we've had, this experiment in saying, we will write a constitution that is different than any country has ever seen. And there were flaws with the Constitution. It was written by white men. Let's be honest. And they were slave owners. And if they wrote it today, I think they would have written it maybe a bit differently. But it was an experiment. It was building that city on the hill based on principles that were important to everyone. And let's continue to build that dream. Today we have the great opportunity to celebrate a family who have lost everything. We couldn't find photos to put up there today because they don't exist. It was lost. We are talking about a family today that don't know where their son is because they've not heard from him in the last 2 weeks. This family has endured more than you and I will ever endure in their life. So let's hear from them. Mary Beth and our translators, please come up.